I'm obsessed with all my stuff.
Have you ever wondered about where all the stuff we buy comes from or where it goes to when you throw it out?
The textbook says that stuff moves through a system.
From extraction to production to distribution to consumption to disposal.
Altogether, it's called the material economy.
That is not the whole story. There's a lot missing from that explanation.
For one thing, this system looks like it's fine. No problem. But the truth is, this system is in crisis. And the reason why it's in crisis is because it's a linear system. We live in a finite planet, and you can't run a linear system in a finite planet.
Indefinitely.
Every step along the way, this system is interacting with the real world.
It interacts with economies, societies, cultures, the environment.
And all along the way, it's bumping up against limits. Let's go back and fill in some of the blank. Well, one of the most important things it's missing is people. Yes, people. People live and work all along this system. And some people in this system matter a little more than others. Who are they? Now let's start with the government. My friends tell me we should use a tank to symbolize government, and in some countries, more than others.
Now, I'm using a person to symbolize the government because I hold true to the vision and values that the government should be.
Of the people, for the people, and by the people. It's the government's job to watch out for us, to take care of us. That's their job. Then along came the corporation. Now, the reason the corporation looks bigger than the government is because the corporation is bigger than the government. Of the 100 largest economies on Earth now,
51% are corporations. The government makes sure that things run better for the corporations than for the people.
Okay, so let's see what else is missing from this picture. We'll start with extraction, which is a fancy word for natural resource exploitation, which is a fancy word for trashing the planet. What this looks like is we chop down trees, we blow up mountains to get the metals in them. We use up all the water and wipe out all the animals. So here we're running up against our first limit. We're running out of resources. We are using too much stuff. Now, I know this can be hard to hear, but it's the truth, so we've got to deal with it.
In the last few decades, we have used up about a third of the world's natural resources. We're cutting, we're mining, we're hauling, we're trashing the world so fast. We're undermining the planet's ability for people to live here. In the United States, there is less than 4% of the original forest left. 40% of the waterways have become undrinkable. The US has 5% of the world's population, but we're using 30% of the world's resources and creating 30% of the world's waste. If everybody used resources the way the United States does, we would need 3 to 5 planets to sustain us.
But you know what? We've only got one. So the developed world's response is to go take someone else's land. This is the third world, which some would say is our stuff that somehow got on someone else's land. And what does that look like? Same thing, trashing the planet.
Okay, 75% of the world's fisheries are fished at or beyond capacity. 80% of the world's original forests are gone. In the Amazon alone, we're losing 2,000 trees per minute. That's like 7 football fields lost per minute. What about the people living there? Well, they don't own these resources regardless of whether they've been living there throughout generations after generations. They do not own the means of production and do not buy a lot of stuff. In this system, if you do not own or buy a lot of stuff, then you have no value. Next, the materials are moved into production. And what happens there is we use energy to mix toxic chemicals and natural resources to make toxic contaminated products. Out of 100,000 synthetic chemicals, only a handful of them have been tested for synergistic toxic impacts. And we know one thing: toxins in, toxins out. As long as we keep putting toxins in our industrial systems, we're going to keep getting toxins into our homes, our workplaces, our schools, and most of all, our bodies. Some chemicals, such as BFRs, they're neurotoxic, harmful to our brains. What are we doing using these products? Yet we put them in our computers, our pillows, our appliances.
Now, these toxins build up the food chain and concentrate in our bodies. Do you know which food at the top of the food chain with the highest concentration of contaminants? Human breast milk. That means we've reached a point where the smallest members of our society, our babies, are receiving the highest dose of toxic chemicals from breastfeeding from their mothers. Breastfeeding must be the fundamental human act of nurturing. Now, breastfeeding is still best, and mothers should continue breastfeeding, but we should protect it. They should protect it. I thought the government was looking out for us. And of course, the people who bear the biggest brand from these toxic chemicals
are the factory workers, many of whom are women of reproductive age. They're working with reproductive toxins, carcinogens, and more. What kind of women of reproductive age would work in a job exposed to reproductive toxins, except for a woman with no other options? And that's one of the beauties of these systems. The erosion of local economies and environments ensures a constant supply of people with no other options. Globally, 200,000 people a day are moving from environments that have sustained them for generations into cities. Many who live in slums, looking for a job no matter how toxic it is. See, it's not only resources that are wasted in this system, people to whole communities. These products lead to a lot of pollution. In the US, our industry admits to producing more than 4 billion pounds of pollution, which is probably more because that's all that they emit.
So that's another limit because yuck. Who wants to smell 1 billion toxic chemicals a year? So what do? Move all the factories overseas, pollute somebody else's land, but surprise, a lot of that pollution is coming right back at us, carried by wind currents. So what happens after all of these natural resources are turned into products? They move here for distribution. Distribution means selling all of that contaminated junk as quickly as possible.
The goal here is to keep the prices down, keeping people buying and keeping the inventory moving. How do they keep the prices down? They don't pay the store worker very much. They skip on health insurance every time they can. It's all about externalizing the cost. What that means is that the real cost of making stuff isn't captured in the price. In other words, we aren't paying for the stuff that we buy. So how could $4.99 possibly capture the cost of making this radio and getting it into our hands? The metal was probably mined in South Africa. The petroleum was probably drilled in Iraq. The plastic was probably produced in China. Maybe the whole thing was assembled by a 15-year-old in Mexico.
$4.99 won't even pay the rent for the shelf space it occupied until I came along. So who did pay? These people who lost their natural resource. These people paid for the loss of their clean air with their increasing cancer and asthma rates. Kids in the Congo paid with their future. Kids in the Congo drop out of school to mine for the co-term, a metal we need for our cheap and disposable electronics. These people even paid for having to cover for their own health insurance. All along this system, people pitched in so we could get this radio for $4.99. And none of these contributions are recorded in any accounts book. That's what I mean by the company owners externalizing the true cost of production. And that brings us to the golden era of consumption. This is the heart of the system, the engine that drives it. This is so important that protecting this arrow that has become the priority of both of these guys.
So that's why after 9/11, the president of all things said to shop. To shop. We have become a nation of consumers. Our primary identity has become that of consumers, not mothers, teachers, farmers, of consumers. The primary way that our value is measured and demonstrated is by how much we contribute to this era. And doing, and shop, and shop, and shop, keep the materials flowing. And flow they do. Guess what percentage of this material flow through this system? And still what products we use. 6 months after sale in North America. 1%. In other words, 99% of the things we mine, harvest, transport. 99% of the things we run through the system is trashed within 6 months. Now, how could we run a planet on that level of materials to burn? It wasn't always like this on that level. The average person in the US consumes twice as much as they used to 50 years ago. Ask your grandma, stewardship and resourcefulness and thrift were valued. So how did it happen? Well, it didn't just happen. It was designed shortly after World War II. These guys were figuring out how to ramp up the economy. Retail earnest came up with a solution for the whole system. Our enormously productive economy demands that we make conception of our way of life, that we convert the buying of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in conception. Many things burned up and consumed at an ever-accelerating rate. Eisenhower's Council of Economic Advisors, Tillman said, the American economy's ultimate purpose is to produce more consumer goods. More consumer goods? They got us to jump onto this train so enthusiastically.
Two of their most effective strategies was planned obsolescence and perceived obsolescence. Planned obsolescence is another word for designed for the dump. It means they make stuff to be useless as soon as possible or as quickly as possible. It's obvious for things like plastic bags and coffee cups, and chuck it and buy new ones. Everything, even computers. Have you noticed when you buy computers, the technology is changing so fast that only in a couple of years it's an impediment to communication. Open up a desktop computer and check what's inside and see that the piece that changes each year is a tiny little part in the corner. You can't just change that piece because each new version is a different shape, so you have to chuck the whole thing into the dump and buy a new one. Read an industrial journal from the 1950s when planned obsolescence was really catching on. These designers were so open about it, they actually discussed how fast that they can make stuff break, leaving the consumer without enough faith, so they can go buy another one. It was so intentional, but stuff cannot break fast enough to keep this arrow afloat. So there's also perceived obsolescence. Now perceived obsolescence convinces us to throw away stuff that are still perfectly useful. How do they do that? They change the way that stuff looks. So if you bought your stuff a couple years ago, so everyone can tell, you have not contributed to this arrow recently. And since the way we demonstrate our value is contributing to this arrow, it can't be embarrassing. Like I have this fat wide computer monitor that I've had on my desk for 5 years. My friend just bought a new computer. She has a shiny, sleek, white monitor. It matches her computer, her phone, even her pen stamp. She looks like she's driving in Spaceship Central, and I look like I have a washing machine on my desk. Fashion is another prime example of this. Like, have you ever wondered why women's shoes heels go from fat one year to skinny the next, then to fat? Not because there's a life debate on which heel is the best. It's because wearing a fat heel and a skinny heel year shows everybody that you have not contributed to that era recently. So you're not as valuable as that person with skinny heels next to you, or more likely in some ad. Advertising and media play a big role in this. Each of us in the US is targeted with over 3,000
ads a day.
We see more ads today than people did 50 years ago in a lifetime. So what's the point of an ad than to make us unhappy with what we have? 3,000 times a day, we are told that our hair is wrong, our skin is wrong, our car is wrong, our furniture is wrong, we are wrong. But it can all be made right if we just go shopping. Media helps us in all this. So the only part of the material economy that we see is the shopping. The extraction, production, and disposal all happen outside the field of our vision. So in the US, we have more stuff than ever before. So polls show that our natural happiness is declining. Our national happiness peaked in the 1950s, the same time that this consumption mania started. Interesting coincidence. I think I know why. We have more stuff than time for things that really make us happy. Friends, family, leisure time. We're working harder than ever, some analysts say. We have less leisure time than any time since feudal society. And do you know what the two major things that we do with the scant leisure time that we have? Watch TV and shop. In the US, we spend 3 or 4 more times shopping than our counterparts in Europe do. So we're in this ridiculous cycle where we go to work, come home, sit on the couch and watch TV.
And the ads tell us that you suck.
And then you have to go to work to pay for the stuff that you just bought. So you come home and you're more tired, so then you sit down and watch more TV until you have to go to the mall again, until we're on this crazy work, watch, spend treadmill. And we could just stop. So in the end, what happens to all this stuff that we buy anyway? At this rate of consumption, they can't even fit in our house anyway. Even if the average size of our houses is twice the sizes of the 70s. This is the part of the materials economy that we know the most, because we have to haul the junk to the curb ourselves. Each of us in the United States makes 4.5 pounds of junk a day. That's twice of what we used to make 30 years ago. All of this garbage either gets dumped in a landfill, which is a big hole in the ground, or if you're really unlucky, first it's burned in an incinerator and then dumped into a landfill. Either way, it still pollutes the air, land, and water, and don't forget, it changes the climate. Incineration is really bad. Remember the toxins in the production stage? Incineration releases the toxics into the air. Even worse, it makes new super toxic, like dioxin. Dioxin is the most toxic substance known to man.
Incinerators are the #1 source of dioxin. That means we can stop the #1 source of the most toxic substance known to man just by stopping burning the trash. We can stop it today. Some companies don't want to build landfills and incinerators here, so they just export the disposal too. So what about recycling? Does recycling help? Yes, recycling helps. Recycling reduces the pressure in this end and reduces the pressure of mind and harvest of that end. Yes, we should all recycle. But recycling's not enough. Recycling will never be enough. For a couple of reasons. First, waste coming out from our houses are just the tip of the iceberg.
For every garbage can that you put out on the curb, 70 garbage cans remain upstream to fill up the garbage can that you put out on the curb. So even if we could recycle 100% of the garbage that comes out of our households, it doesn't get to the core of the problem.
Also, most of the garbage cannot be recycled, either because it contains too many toxics, or it's designed not to be recycled in the first place. Like those juice packs, they have layers of paper, metal, plastic all squished together. You can never separate them for true recycling. So you see, this is a system in crisis. All along the way, we're bumping against limits, from changing climate to declining happiness. It's just not working.
But the good thing about such an all-pervasive problem, there are so many points of intervention. There are people working here on saving forests, here on clean production, labor rights, fair trade, conscious consuming, blocking landfills and incinerators, and very importantly, taking back our government. So it really is by the people, for the people. All this work is critically important, but all these things start moving when you see the connections, when you see the big picture. So when all the people in this system get united, we can reclaim and transform this linear system into something new. A system that doesn't waste resources or people. So what we need to chuck is that old school throwaway mindset. There's a new school of thinking about this stuff. It's based on sustainability and equity. Things like green chemistry and zero waste, closed loop production, renewable energy, local living economies. It's already started. Some say it's unrealistic and it can't happen. I say the ones who are unrealistic are the ones who say we can continue in the old way.
They're dreaming. Remember, that old way didn't just happen. It wasn't like gravity that you just had to live with.
People created it, and we are people too. So let's create something new. Let's take care of our Mother Earth. Get involved.